I want to thank you, everybody, first of all, for being with us today. And today will be a special session because it will be hosted not that much by myself as usual, but by Mr. James Burgess. Thank you, James, for being here and presenting the Elven Star method. I'm very excited to learn more about it because it's something that's new to me as well. You have a little bit introduced me to it in the last couple of weeks, and I started doing some exercises which already are turning out to be very interesting. But for those of you that don't know James, just very quickly, I would say that I found your work, James, very accidentally, together with Dwayne, while we were looking for information about the Sabian symbols, and we really appreciate the many resources you're constantly creating about the Sabian symbols, the videos, the information on your website, the different articles, and the connection that you make with different systems that enrich our knowledge, not just of astrology, but of other things that obviously lead us to the same places all the time and make it even more comprehensive what we do. So we are very excited. I personally am very excited to learn more about the Elven Star methods and how we can connect that with our charts and the 7 Sabian symbols that can be calculated. I will now pass it on to you to run the session the way you wish and to introduce us to your talk. I will just be answering the questions in the chat box. If any of you want to, comment, ask a question, need a link or whatever during the process, and I will be letting you in and out and muting your microphones. So once again, thanks for being here, and let's begin, James.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you all for coming. What I'm going to do is to present the Elven Star method. And this is a mystic teaching. I'll describe what I mean by that term mystic a bit later. And it comes from, it's a composite teaching derived from 3 basic ideas. Sufism is one of them, Sabian Symbols is another, and the mysticism of the number 7 itself is the third contributor. I'm going to go through how these 3 aspects come together and how to integrate them into the Elven Star method, and then describe how they can be used to awaken soul consciousness in the client, if you're using it, and yourself, of course. So thank you, Radlina, for your hosting today. I appreciate what you've done. And thank you, Dwayne, for having introduced me to this group. It's a good connection. I also want to let you know of the other contributors who've been very substantial in their offerings to help me do this work. And I think many of you will have seen the website that I've created, Sabian Mysteries. And the one thing that will have impressed you most of all, I'm sure, is the art, the images of the Sabian symbols one by one. I find those pictures to be very beautiful indeed. And I want to talk to you a little bit about those pictures. Some 18 months ago, I was getting involved in Instagram, and I met a woman online who was drawing these pictures, and I asked her if I could use them on my website. And she said yes, and so we started a correspondence together, and we started to talk to each other maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and discussing the Sabian symbols, discussing astrology generally, and becoming friends and so on. And then I learned that she was not only a brilliant artist, but she was also very good at coding, computer coding. And so she actually developed for me the Sabian Symbols calculator, and later the Elven Star calculator. Now, if you think about how difficult it is to study Sabian symbols if you're not an astrologer, you can just realize the importance of developing the calculator. It means that anyone can come who is not an astrologer, and they can find their Sabian symbols and get into the mystery, because you don't really need to be an astrologer to appreciate the Sabian symbols. So when Ruby Fumiski developed the calculator, it made the world was more able to tune into Sabian symbols. So she's really expanded the reach of the work of the first masters that developed the Sabian symbols. Now, Ruby Fumiski is with us today, and I want her to at least wave. Are you going to wave to us? Yes, there she is. Hello. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, there are my pictures. Oh, here is my picture.
Some pictures in the background. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, lovely. Okay, so Ruby's English isn't so good. That's part of what we were doing together. We were learning languages as well. So thank you for coming, Ruby. I'll also say hello to Richard. Wave, Richard. Richard's there. And Richard and I have been partners for quite some time in developing certain projects, one of which, the main one, is the 7-word system. And that's an integral part of this Elven Star method, which I'll talk about a bit later. And Richard has also been the first person with whom I was sharing the work I was doing on the Elven Star. And I want to ask him to say a little bit, how did you find being taken through the Elven Star process, Richard? Unmute Richard for me.
I'm trying. He needs to do it from his side.
Okay.
There you go. Absolutely fascinating, James. Absolutely fascinating. And it's very much a work in progress for me and an ongoing process. I created a big document for myself, starting out with a table, as you suggest, I think, on your website. You might even call it a table of the 7 mysteries, where I wrote down the 7 symbols, my 7 symbols, the degree of each of those symbols, and the keyword associated with those symbols. Then I went on, and for each of the points of the Elven Star, I went to your website, James, and copied out or copy and pasted into this document the description, the 7 words description of each of the points on my Elven Star, Rudyard's description, Ruby's pictures, and both of the videos that you've produced, or 2 videos for each of the 7 points, the Sabian Symbols video that you've recorded, James, and also the Elven Star Mystery, the 7 Elven Star Mystery point videos. So I copied those into the document just to have an easy reference way of getting into them. And then the final thing I did was to look at what you've called your Sabian life journey. So taking each of the 7 points in turn and asking yourself, how can I do that? And with your system, you produce this wonderful table of, well, the answer to that question is in the degree before, and the answer to that question is in the degree before that. And you can go around the whole 360 degrees of the zodiac. So it's no surprising that this takes time to assimilate, and you've already mentioned it's a mystery. So that's my starting point. And then I kind of carry that document with me, leave it by my bedside, read it almost on a daily basis, and uncover a little more of what each of these symbols may mean for me.
Okay, thank you. What impact did it have on you, on your self-perception?
Well, I consider this to be a very sacred process. So even just creating the document and picking the document up takes me into a different state where it's hard to explain really, but for me, the best way to describe that is it's part of my sacred process.
That's lovely. Thank you. One of the things that Richard and I have been working on more recently is to develop a training program, a training platform And recently we've pretty much completed that. And so now it's possible to do a training, an online training in the Elven Star method. And we can talk about that later. And we've also initiated the possibility this season in August of doing Elven Star retreats. And 2 or 3 of the people who are here today will be joining me on that retreat. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to start to explain the various components of this system. And let's begin with the word mystic and mysticism, because a lot of people use this word casually, but for me it's a very specific word. And when I say this Elven Star process is a mystical process, I'm counterbalancing the idea of a magical practice. So for me, there's mysticism and magic, which are kind of related phenomena, but they come at the same thing from different side. When I talk about mysticism, I'm talking about moving into a state of being within which magic can be practiced. When I'm talking about magic, I'm talking about creating a change in your circumstances, a physical change in the world, from which, in order to do that, you need to get into a state of mysticism. So the mystic can practice magic. The magician needs to be in a mystic state to do that. That's the meaning that I give to those words. So when I'm saying that the Elven Star method is a mystical practice, what I mean is that we move away from the world into a sense of self, which is higher, shall we call it. It's distant from the phenomena of the world. And in order to be able to do that, we need to fully embrace what's been going on in the world. Until you've actually really accepted all that's going on in your life and understood it and integrated it as a whole, it's not really feasible to move up to the higher level. And the aim with this process is to do that, to touch at first and then be able to choose at will soul consciousness. By which I mean the soul, for me, is the highest aspect of the individual self. Insofar as we are, I think all of us, aware that the only reality is here and now, then everything that we can conceive of, everything that exists, is present now. So we must be able to access it here and now. And so if God exists, then it must exist somehow as a part of who we are. And that part of God, which is specific to us, that's the connecting point between the self, the ego self, and the unity itself. The connection between God and I is the area of soul. That's how I define the word anyway. And what we're doing with the Elven Star method is to move away from commitment, attachment, obsession with the ego, and just rise above that to glimpse what it would be like to be unified with all and everything. Now, this is not just a theory. This is something that mystics do all of the time. That's what makes them mystics. And a mystic tends to want to do that more than anything else and to live in that state and have problems with getting on with worldly things. And that does not define me at all. I'm not a mystic. However, ordinary people who live in the world like us, I'm assuming, we can actually touch that mystical state. And that is something that many of us have already done in meditation, especially if you're on retreat. If you actually do a huge amount of spiritual practice, hour after hour after hour for many days, then you get to that state of being where you're not really connecting with the ego at all. You're in that consciousness of soul. And it has taken me a very long time in the past to be able to move from ordinary consciousness into that state. But what I'm trying to do with the Elven Star is to make that journey a lot quicker and a lot more clear and certain, and to make it available for those people who don't want to spend the time on retreat. So that gives you a sense of what our purposes with the Elven Star method. My birthday is the 7th of May, and I'm very proud of the fact that I'm number 7. And 7 has been a part of my whole life. Every time the 7th of May comes, I get very excited, as birthday people do. And so I've always known that 7 was special for me. And it was only later in life that I kind of got the sense that 7 is special for other people as well. I didn't realize that. But it is. 7, in some way, is a very special number. For example, we divide our time into units of 7. The week does not have to be 7 days long. It is 7 days long for a particular reason, but it doesn't have to be. And we see 7 colors in the rainbow. And there are not 7 colors in the rainbow. That's an illusion. It's a continuum of light. And we call it 7 for some reason. In numerology, 7 would be associated with the vibration of Neptune. And so there's this sense of illusion and ill-defined, non-specific reality, almost to the point of being beyond reality or into its own reality. And 7 is very rarely seen in nature. You see 1 everywhere and 2 everywhere. You see 3 very often, 4 all of the time. 6 is pretty common amongst the insects. 5, here we are, 5 fingers on the hands. But where do you see 7 in nature? It's not there. It's not easily seen. There are some starfish which have got 7 tentacles, so I'm told. And the only other place that I know about is which is commonly depicted is actually the marijuana plant. Interestingly, so we've got this number 7, which is really weird. It's odd. It's very strange indeed. And the people that started the Sabian Symbols study, they didn't go there. They studied 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, but that's as far as they went. So I was fascinated to see whether we could study the Sabian Symbols with the number 7 as well. And yeah, famous people like Rudolf Steiner and Khalil Gibran, they really celebrate this number 7. And so it's obvious to me that 7 has that special quality of mysticism about it. And therefore, I was really pleased when I started to understand Sufism more. I studied Sufism in some depth, and it's a mystic path of breath and light and sound and consciousness. And the key teaching is called the 7 planes of consciousness. Now, this is not unique to Sufism. It's actually studied in Buddhism, although they call it the 6, because they don't talk about the 7th plane in Buddhism. And the hierarchy of needs in Maslow's sort of system is studying the same phenomenon. And when we think about the number 7, in terms of 7 planes of consciousness, we start to get some insight into why the number 7 is mystical. And this really interests me. I'm quite happy with accepting things which are not proved, but professionally, I was an accountant. I went to math school and university to do mathematics. I'm fascinated to find the answer. Why? Why does astrology work? Why does mysticism work? What is it? I'm really interested to answer those questions. And so when I was trying to talk about the 7 planes of consciousness in Sufism, I really found it necessary to develop my own take on that. And I've developed the 7-word system to explain the 7 planes of consciousness. So I'm going to just briefly go over that now. In the 7 planes of consciousness basically is saying that energy exists in 7 really clear levels of vibration. And then energy slows down to its slowest possible vibration, it becomes physical. So physicality is just the slowest vibration of energy. Everything is energy, and physical reality is the slowest version of that. And what determines whether something is physical or not is that only one thing can occupy a particular space. That's what makes something real in the physical world. You can't have two things in the same place at the same time, which you can have in the other planes of consciousness. So the fundamental word associated with the earth dimension, the first plane of consciousness, is the word no. So in my 7-word system, the word no relates to the first plane of consciousness. The second plane of consciousness is called the astral plane, and this is where we go in our imagination. Bless you, Goldie. And when we dream and we think and we feel, there's this world that we have, which is uniquely ours. It is a world. It is different from the physical reality that we feel and know about, and we can't integrate with it in the same way as the physical reality, but it is a reality that we have, the world of our thoughts and feelings. And this is what we expand as we say the word hello. So the second word in the 7-word system is hello. The third plane of consciousness is called the plane of love, harmony, and beauty. And this is the world that we experience through the heart, the soft side of the heart. This is made known to us in the sense of how we feel when we're attracted to someone, or we feel compassion or acceptance or accepting towards someone. We feel it in the heart. So that's very similar to the feeling we have when we appreciate things. And so that's associated with the word thank you, and especially when we're appreciating beauty. The fourth plane is called the heroic plane, and this is associated with the word goodbye. It takes courage to move on through life, to make decisions, to move into a new adventure. The fifth word is please. This is where we try to create a new vision of reality. And this is associated with sacredness in Sufism. So the fifth plane of consciousness is called the plane of splendor. And it's what we do when we integrate our own personal vision with the personal vision with another person. And if you want somebody to do something for you and you say please, the best way to set about doing that is to try and say, let's co-create this thing together with which both of us want. So if you can merge visions with somebody else, both of you are motivated towards the outcome, as opposed to saying, please, will you do that for me? Which is not really the word please at all. And that's where you want something and the other person doesn't want it. That does not develop synergy, that develops resistance. That's bullying. So in this system, please is where you actually start to tune in to the soul's vision of the other person as well as your own soul's vision. It's the place of sacredness, it's the place of prayer. And it leads eventually to the sixth plane of consciousness, which is the immaculate state in Sufism. This is where there is almost no sense of self at all. You're impeccable, you're perfect, you have no imperfections. And this is associated with the word sorry in the 7-word system. And it has a lot to do with reflexive self-consciousness. In every spiritual tradition, they teach reflexive self-consciousness by one name or another. You could say, what goes around comes around. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Do as you'd be done to. It's all to do with seeing how your action is impacting upon the other. And if you can actually be that way, so that everything you do and everything you are is aware of the impact of it on another person, then you move into this higher state of being where you're clear of conscience. So if you live with an impeccable consciousness, then you're on the sixth plane of, an impeccable conscience, then you're on the sixth plane of consciousness. And this is the word sorry. Beyond that is the transcendental realm, and that's God's space. And this is the word yes. And we don't really have an equivalence to it in terms of personality, because as soon as we're in that state, we've lost all personality. We're into the realm of pure mysticism. There are some people that live in that state, but most of them would be locked up in the West. They would seem to be psychotic, really disturbed people. And in the Middle East, 1,000 years ago, they were considered to be very special in the eyes of God and treated with great respect. So that's changed a lot over the years. So we see that the Sufism's 7 planes of consciousness can be readily summarized or labeled by the 7 words: yes, no, please, thank you, sorry, hello, and goodbye. And these are not just metaphors. If you have a problem with any of these realities, then you need to say that word associated with it more effectively. So if you have too little love in your life, you need to say thank you a bit more often. If you're not really getting into the heightened state of spiritual awareness that the 6th plane indicates, then you need to say sorry a bit more often. That's the 7-word system. And it does seem to work. Now, moving on to the Sabian symbols, I think a lot of us will have heard a lot about Sabian symbols because of the work of Dane Rudyard. Now, the mystic that originally channeled these images, Elsie Wheeler, would have seen them. She saw visual images. And this is why it made me so pleased when I got deeply involved in the visual aspect of Sabian symbols with Ruby Fumizgi, because the beginning of it all is visual. And the words that came, albeit through Mark Edmund Jones and Dane Rudyard, geniuses both in astrology who were brilliant with their words, nevertheless, it was an image that was trying to sort of be squeezed into something as well defined as a verbal expression must be. So I think one of the important things for us to remember when we're studying Sabian symbols is to understand that they were derived intuitively, in the sense that there was no given word material. And that intuition was from one person, Elsie Wheeler, and God bless her, she was brilliant. But then I think all of us, we can move into that heightened state of soul consciousness where we can have our own interpretations of the Sabian mysteries, the Sabian symbols. So a lot of what I want to do is to make available to people the opportunity to express their own take on what each of the Sabian symbols means, and to do that from a heightened state of being. In order to understand Sabian symbols at all, you have to open the left and the right brain to do that. They're, for some people who don't know what they are, the zodiac is defined by 12 to make each of the zodiac signs, Aries, Taurus, and so on. It's divided by 360 to get a Sabian symbol. So each particular degree of the zodiac has got its own description, like the Pope, or a cat arguing with a mouse, or an old man trying vainly to reveal the mysteries. These are the images that the Sabian symbols are. And they're bizarre, they're ambiguous, they're paradoxical, they're by no means clear cut. We cannot understand them using logic alone. So we must develop our intuition. We must trust our intuition more and more as we use the Sabian symbols. And as we trust our intuition becomes more trustworthy. And we're forced to do that with Sabian symbols, whereas if we're just astrologers, we're not. We can read a book and we can say, so-and-so says this is the description of Jupiter in Virgo. There it is in the book. I have the authority for interpreting it that way. And that expands the number of people that can do astrology, but it really limits the reach of astrologers because they are not encouraged, in fact demanded, to develop their own intuition. Whereas with Sabian symbols, you have no choice. They make no sense until you use your own intuition. So we also understand that the Sabian symbols are a journey, and 360 stages of a very particular journey that we take, and we can study that journey and map that journey onto our own spiritual unfolding. Nobody's saying that we're moving through a sequential process on our spiritual journey, but it's very useful to look at the stages that we have to go through and see where we are with them. And Rudyard did most of the work on that. Now, the name Sabian symbols has been chosen by Elsie because she believes that she received the information for them, presumably. Why else would she use the word? From something, someone called Sabian, the Sabians. And there were such people that they are mentioned 3 times in the Quran, for example. They are called people of the book. In other words, they followed the teachings of Abraham. And we can't go back before the time of Sumeria and Babylon, but I believe these Sabian people do have their roots before our history started, with cuneiform developed in Sumeria, I think. And there was this temple found in southern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe, and I believe that the Sabians are connected with this. And this temple culture clearly indicates an interest and a knowledge of astronomy and the attempt to give meaning to astronomy, therefore astrology. That's what astrology is. Astronomy is looking at what's going on in the sky. Astrology is understanding what it means. We're trying to. So I think the Sabians were the first astrologers on the planet. They were also the first farmers. They developed the strain of wheat, which is now worldwide, and it was locally grown. So these people, 12,000 years ago, this is when everybody else was a hunter-gatherer. These people were actually building temples which defy the imagination, how they could have done that. And they've introduced the idea of farming and astronomy and astrology and so on. So it seems totally obvious to me that they must have had a philosophy, a spiritual philosophy, some understanding of the meaning of life and so on. And I think that is what we're trying to tune into. That is what Sabian Symbols mystery is. So to summarize then, the number 7, Sufism and Sabian Symbols, are all kind of brought together within the Elven Star. I also think it's worth mentioning astrology. Astrology is not a science. If astrology was a science, then very, very good astrologers would be millionaires, and they're not. Astrology is an art. It's an interpretation that we give, and its approach, the way we've approached it, has changed over the years. Before Jung, there was very little psychology involved in astrology. It was very much philosophy. And even when we're looking at Mark Edmund-Jones and Dane Rudyard's work, they're really focusing quite a lot on esoteric ideas, trying to prove or explain the relationship between up there and down here, as above, so below. In other words, mapping the physical universe onto astrology and trying to demonstrate how that works and what that means. That's how it started. Early astrologers were more interested in that, and then the process of astrology becoming much more psychological really started in the 60s and became a big thing in the 80s. In the early times, I mean, if you look at a textbook written in the 50s, there's not much psychology in it. But look at a textbook written in the 80s, it's pretty much all psychology. And that movement from philosophy to psychology was a real shift that took place in the last century. And it's kind of implied, not really overly stated, that there's a spiritual dimension to astrology. And quite a lot of people who are astrologers, and certainly a lot of people who go to astrologers, would not think of themselves as spiritual people particularly. But I do. I am a spiritual person. I want to include my astrology in my spirituality, and my spirituality in my astrology. So when I actually present anything to do with astrology, I'm going to take a spiritual kind of take on it. And I think we're going to see that within the Elven Star method. So for me, the Elven Star is my path, my path towards greater and greater consciousness. So there it is in summary. I've actually made a video which explains the technique rather more clearly, I hope, than what I've just done. So perhaps, Radlina, would you like to show the video for us now?
Yes, of course. I'm going to share the screen now with you so we can all see the video.
The Elven Star system is based on the marriage between the 7 Sabian symbols that unfold from your sun position in your horoscope, and align these same 7 with the 7 word system. The 7 word system has the 7 words no, hello, thanks, goodbye, please, sorry, and yes. And these are labels, shall we say, for archetypal principles that are studied in Sufism as the 7 planes of consciousness. The idea behind this cosmology is that in every moment, in every system, in any dynamic situation at all, there are 7 interwoven strands of energy expressing themselves. It's very similar to the idea that the one light can be broken into 7 colors in a prism or by a rainbow. It's an illusion that there are 7, but it's a useful illusion that awakens the number 7 in some mysterious way within us. There was a time in days long ago when numbers were worshipped as though they were gods. And we do know that the numbers have special importance. We feel them differently. We feel the number 7 as the number of mystery and magic and that which cannot be explained. It's the fairy kingdom, the elves, unicorns. These things are all resonant with the number 7. And if we can actually awaken that resonance within ourselves, then we can know what we could not know before. And the approach to awakening that 7ness within us is taken from 2 sides. On the one side, the 7-word system is quite rational, quite logical, very clear-cut, and explains how to cope with life, what you're trying to achieve and how to achieve it, life management skills, with a spiritual sense, a spiritual spin. Whereas the 7 Sabian mysteries, which are pretty much uniquely yours, doesn't want a rational explanation, just wants the feeling of isness, 7ness within us. Now the 7 points of the Elven Star unfold from the Sabian symbol, which is your sun sign. So the first thing to do, clearly, is to understand what that means. And so we're talking about a fairly advanced interest here in the Sabian symbols. Who of us really understands the deeper meaning within our Sabian symbols? You need to really engage with it, you need to study it and feel it and claim it in order to understand it. And by doing that, you're establishing your identity on a different level. You're establishing yourself in the realm of number 7, in the realm of mystery and magic. So, of course you have a physical body, of course you have a name, you have a role in society that everybody would recognize. That is who you are on one level. But that's not the end of the question. There's also something unique about you which could be described best as your atmosphere. It's difficult to describe, difficult to define, but it comes across as how you are, your tone of being. Certain people would enjoy that. They would find it relaxing. Other people would find it irritating or make them restless or whatever. It's not something which can be expressed in the same way to everyone you meet, nor indeed in every situation you encounter. But it is who you are, and it is who you know yourself to be. And that's the essence of self, which we're trying to study. Imagine yourself to be alone with no distractions, just sitting quietly and knowing yourself to be, just to be alive. You'd have a feeling about yourself. You'd have an awareness of being alive. And that's the essence of who you are. And that equates to the first of the Elven Star points. Now, when we go to the rest, the other 6, we're unfolding from that essential atmosphere of being. And we're trying to get a very nuanced, very subtle take on how you are in an expanded realm throughout all of the worlds. We see the physical world and we think that some people think that's the only world there is. It's just not. There are many worlds. And we have a place in them. And we do not necessarily know how to communicate with the other parts of ourselves in the other realms, which the Elven Star course is trying to rectify. So when we're trying to look at how we use the mind in order to identify ourselves, we would need to look for the second point in the Elven Star. We would need to consider what we have to offer at the highest level of communication with another person, or indeed another being. We can communicate with all beings, whether they have physicality or not. And our approach to that communication is indicated by the second Sabian symbol in the Elven Star. The third point of the Elven Star indicates how we feel in the heart the more communicative, more relational aspect of love. Love is such a complex concept. It has many different expressions. The one we're talking about here is the one that is most clearly felt in a loving family, where there's familiarity, there's care and concern and helpfulness, and it's not necessarily always peaceful. It can include all manner of expressions of selfishness as well as selflessness. It's real, it's the family. And although you go up and down with your family feelings, for the most part you'll go home at Christmas and enjoy that sense of being one together as a family. Now, the way in which you present yourself in that environment, within the context of your family, is an aspect of who you are. And it's different from how you are in communications generally. It might not be very communicative. It might be thoroughly based in the realm of feeling. It might be different from how you place yourself in the community as well. It would be a different feeling, wouldn't it, the family feeling? So that's indicated by the third point in the Elven Star. Now, a deeper aspect of the heart is often called courage. It relates to faith. It relates to the matter of what you would stand for. What would actually get you to risk life and limb, because it's that important in your being. And the heroine within you, that sense of standing firm, standing strong, protecting everything that you love, which turns out not to be people or things. It turns out to be a sense of valuing what's important to you, perhaps justice, perhaps truth itself, perhaps authenticity, your expression when push comes to shove. This part of you is an aspect of who you are, and this is indicated by the fourth point in the Elven Star. Now, the fifth point in the Elven Star relates to vision and what we do about enacting our vision in the world. So within each of us is a visionary being. And to tune in to what might be the highest vision that we can grasp in life, we'd need to study the fifth Sabian symbol and really understand it, really get a sense of how that would be if it was optimized fully. How would you be if you put forward your best version of self? your highest claim on the world that you live in. It's not likely to be realized early in life. It takes quite a lot of strength and clarity in order to make a claim which nobody previously has made. This is a unique, creative expression, and it impacts strongly upon other people. It's almost certain that you'd need to align with other people who are similar in their own visions for you to enact your vision. So it has quite a lot to do with building a higher social unit together. So it's a mature leadership kind of role. You might support a leader, or you might be a leader yourself, or whatever, but there's this sense of breaking ground, taking a step in a direction that has not been traveled before. So within us, each of us, we have to find that vibration in order to complete who we are. Further than this, the sixth Sabian symbol is really about our spiritual nature, the part of us that does not want to show anyone, defend any argument, be taught any ideals or behaviors or morality. Not interested. But beyond all of that is some sense of our knowledge of whatever we want to call God, the highest level of consciousness that we can conceive, and our relationship to that. This is the sixth Sabian mystery. So when you study your Sabian symbol for that, you need to approach it with reverence. You need to approach it not in a thinking way, but in a way that you might approach a spiritual teacher. You just listen. And if you don't understand, you don't necessarily ask a question, you just allow it to percolate and just seep into your being. It's an indirect approach to knowledge. It's a very subtle idea, this one. The alignment with the 7 words is the word sorry. And sorry indicates that we have been insufficiently sensitive to another person. So we say sorry to repair the damage. In this case, what we're trying to establish is whether we're being sufficiently sensitive to God. And when I say God in this context, it's the highest sense we have of God. Imagine that to be a part of yourself, with a consciousness, with an angle on things. Not an agenda, but a facet of consciousness that sees things differently. And there's a part of you which is often called conscience, which is awakened within this question. If you do something that's according to the law of the land and approved of by your friends, but it just doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel right, it offends your conscience, then that's not the thing to do, is it? You have to comply with your conscience to feel good about life. So we could simply say that the sixth Sabian mystery is that which is the most subtle and profound spiritual understanding of what your conscience is telling you. When all's said and done, if you were approaching your death now, would you be okay with where you have arrived in your life and what you've done with your life? Are you clear of conscience that you've used life fully and productively? That's probably the sixth mystery. Now the seventh mystery is, in a sense, beyond the beyond. It's hard to know how we would ever really grasp this one. It's beyond the beyond. But we can get a flavor of it, even if we don't understand it fully. We can be led, perhaps, in that direction by coincidences and metaphors that arise in our life, consistent with our Sabian symbol for that seventh point. It's mysterious, let's just say that the seventh point of the Sabian mysteries is how we sink into the mystery, how we allow ourselves such familiarity with the nature of cosmic realities that we can just trust and have faith that everything is fine. And all we need to do is just flow along with things, trying not to go against the flow of what arises. Now, to be able to blend that with the other 6 mysteries is awesomely difficult. And it's not something that we should expect to achieve or finalize, at least. However, the movement towards it has great benefit. This is true of all 7 of the symbols. Just because we're studying them is good. Knowledge can be conceived as having consciousness. Knowledge is conscious of itself. In a way, it's alive on some plane of existence. And as we move towards knowledge, knowledge moves towards us. So even if we don't get the answer to the questions that we're asking them is very valuable indeed. Now, the question we're asking in this exercise is, what do all of these 7 things mean, the Sabian symbols, individually? How can I understand them better using the 7 word system? And what indeed do those 7 words mean individually? Now, if I approach the Sabian symbols with the 7 words, I get a deeper understanding of both. That's an important, very important first stage, but there's a second stage, and that is to somehow try and piece them all together into an integrated whole. An image I've given before is of a chord in music. If you hear all of the notes individually, they sound nice enough. If you hear the chord together, it could be awesome. Same with a rainbow. All of the colours, very nice. See the rainbow all at the same time. It awakens something within us, that sense of right relationship with the world, right relationship with God, and a deep sense of knowledge of self.
All right. This was the video. Now back to you, James.
Thank you. Or in fact, back to you, really. What I'm going to do now is ask Radlina to share with us something of the process that she and I have engaged in recently. What I've done with her, I've treated her as a client and taken her through the Elven Star process so that we can talk about what we have done tonight. And the one thing I haven't mentioned yet, and I will just briefly mention now before we start, is that the beginning process for this method is to look in great detail at your life circumstances. This is a particular practice in Sufism called muhasaba, which roughly translates from Arabic as the word self-accounting, accounting for yourself. And so we begin by recording all the major events and scenarios and people, things that you've done, achievements, all of your life particularities. Just write them down and see if you can remember what actually touched you most deeply. And then to look within them and to try and tease out a pattern within them to see how you have developed each of these 7 energies. And we look at specific events and we align them with the specific word in the 7-word system and then the Sabian mystery associated with your Elven Star. So that's the method. And Radlina has done this in a great deal of depth for us today. So do you want to begin talking us through it, Radlina? And if necessary, I can come in and discuss it with you.
Yes, yes, I would love that. And you can guide me where I'm maybe sometimes if I stray away from how it's meant to be done, because my greatest difficulty in this process was to shut down my astrological prejudices and my astrological kind of habit of thinking about things, and to stop for a moment constantly associating the 7 words, the 7 steps, the 7 mysteries with, for example, with the 7 planets, or with looking at areas of my chart where I plot it. And I hope this may be something useful for other people and interesting to explore from that way. When you have the wheel of your chart with the 360 degrees of the all there. Excuse me, did somebody want to say something? Or was it just, yes? Okay.
Well, I'll take the advantage of interrupting. What is worth saying is that there is an association between the 7 words and the 7 planets, the inner planets. And I didn't tell Radlina what that association was, so she intuitively worked it out, and we agree on most of them.
But
yet she has multiple planets in Scorpio, so it's a requirement for her to disagree a little bit. It's in her nature. So, and also the disagreement fundamentally relates to the gender difference. I'm a man and I see things one way. She's a woman. She thinks another way. Perhaps a bit controversial, but anyway, I see the first word as the sun, and Radlina, I think you see this as the moon.
Yes. Well, I didn't want to go into arguments about this because I thought that would stray us away from what the method is meant to be to start with. But I can mention a little bit my associations and why I think maybe it's got to do. I guess it's got to do with the sun and the moon together. It's obviously that they are very connected, isn't it? All the time. And in astrology, for example, I never look at only the moon in a chart and only the sun. They are a pair that somehow.
Yeah. No, I don't think we disagree philosophically. It's just that you find it easier to associate the moon with your no and sun with your yes. I find it the other way around. But apart from that, it is pretty intuitively clear. And the other words you're going to bring attention to. So carry on, please.
Yes, okay. Well, I guess this is the beauty of this method, that it doesn't need to be that intellectual, as I have this tendency to go into too much reasoning. And what you helped me, James, realize when we had the conversation before today, running through my list of Sabian symbols that fall on those 7 parts of the chart, that I have to maybe calm down my mind and try to give way to the intuition a little bit more. So I've tried to start at least that process. And maybe we can begin with the first one. I had a list which very similar to, let me see, Richard, as Richard said. I've done very similar things to you, Richard. I've listed on a document all the 7 Sabian symbols. I took the definitions from Rudyard, from James, and from another 3rd website which I'm using, just so that I can see what different ideas, the explanations can bring me. And also wrote down the keywords for the 7-word system. And I've also explored it several times and keep going back to them. So I think this is not something we can expect to give us a revelation straight away. So we sit down on a day and we make the list and we read through it, and that's the process. I think this is a meditation exercise, at least that's how I take it. A self-revelation exercise that we can rediscover over time, and maybe at different ages. I've just been introduced to this, but I would be very curious to see how, if I leave it aside for a while, in a couple of years or 3 years, I may have changed my perspective. So, well, shall we begin with the first one, or how?
Yeah, I mean, Scorpio #1 is the good place to begin. I love the coincidence, shall we call it, of the London's bus.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us that story.
Well, this symbol, the very first degree of Scorpio, where my sun is located, is a touristic, well, I'm paraphrasing it, not exactly that, but a touristic bus full of people on a busy city street. And I think when we think of this sort of buses, they are the double-decker buses, isn't it? At least this is what comes to my mind. Very typical for London. So I was born in Bulgaria, and I studied school, there up to my 18th year. Then I moved to London. Well, obviously, a long time before I knew anything about astrology, or let alone this system. So it is, I think, a funny coincidence in one way or another. But if we think about what this symbol maybe implies, there's openness eventually to a greater perspective, not just a local, kind of constrained view of the world, which is totally dictated by wherever you were meant to be living and born into, the culture, the family situation and everything. But this desire to see the world in a way, to see it culturally, look around as a tourist would look around. I've always loved to do that, even before I went to London. The kinds of, say, holidays that I've always enjoyed were this sort of exploring the place, going to the museum, seeing buildings. Especially, I've been always interested in architecture. Later on, I started working something that has become, part of my life up to today. My so-called main work is something between architecture, interior design, and construction. So working with buildings, with how they're constructed, how they're meant to aesthetically look as well, has always been interesting for me. But mainly, this symbol is to do with my, I think, immigrant story. Going out of my home country, and the plan was not to be in London. The plan was to go to the United States. I prepared for many years to go there as a university student. It was a bit of a game of chance because it was quite unlikely at the time. I come from a small country where at the time nobody used to come to England, especially to study. It was kind of an unreachable place. But circumstances led me there. In one way or another. And I went to study in London instead of the United States, which was a last-minute decision in my case. So, yeah, this is generally the direction. Why do I connect this symbol? And this is meant to be, a lot to do with, as James said, our atmosphere. I'm not sure that, even though this is how it's calculated, isn't it? We start with the degree of the sun, and then the rest of the degrees in the Elven Star we get by going 51 approximately degrees from that symbol. Is that correct? So that's
26 is a septile relationship.
A septile relationship. This is something I find extremely interesting for other reasons, again, astrological. I make the parallel to Chiron, just mentioning this quickly, because Chiron revolves around the sun in about 51 years, and I kind of see this another expression of 7 now in the astrological world. And I have a feeling that the planet, so-called planet Chiron, is this, connected to this somehow. So anyway, going back to this, I know that we're meant to start with the sun, but why I feel the moon is related to this initial first symbol, first mystery, because it's the separation from the roots idea. And maybe we can find something in this symbol by this saying no is kind of, I distance myself from something which is given as a thing that I cannot change. I cannot change the fact that I'm Bulgarian, that I come from this particular family, from this particular background, that certain things were there in the beginning that are simply for me to deal with. And I find the no as a initial separation, not this, but maybe something else. And this symbol of the bus, the London double-decker bus, for me personally was exactly that sort of semi-conscious.
I'd like to just, it's not, we could reconcile the sun and the moon question with the 7 words, keywords, because the essential thing we're trying to do is to associate the first Sabian symbol, in your case, the curiosity of the sightseer of the tourist, tourist bus, with the sense of identity. The word no is all about boundaries and identity and choice and truth. What you found yourself to be was a woman in Bulgaria without opportunity to develop your huge curiosity for the mysteries and intellectual pursuits. And so that is your identity. Now, whether you see that as the moon or whether you see that as the sun, it doesn't really matter as long as you see it as your identity.
Yes.
So what we're seeing is that the first degree is, the first degree of the Elven Star is this whole idea of expanding your horizons, and that's so clear, so very, very clear, doesn't it?
Yes, and this is a very good reminder, outside of all astrological associations, just to go back to the degree of the sun. And I think the system is, one thing I really like about it is that it stresses as a first step the degree of everybody's sun. And for me, the sun is extremely important to explore as a direction, as something that we need to gradually over time discover. And I see this as another way, possible way to go through a journey through which we can discover what that sun was really about and what we need to contribute at the end of the day. So yes, I think it's starting to work for me from there.
I think this is exactly the main point, is that the sun is so important that just to see it as the sun in Taurus, or even at the 16th degree of Taurus, it's just not quite enough. It's more than that. And what we're doing with this study is seeing the 7 vibration, the chord of 7 applied to the sun. It gets a fuller, deeper, wider sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts in your case with this first degree.
Well, now that I think of it and the way you described it just now, maybe it makes sense also to begin with the sun, because we're setting the tone. We're saying, okay, this is the direction. Now let's explore the rest of them to see how to get there. Well, in my initial thinking, when we were discussing preliminarily, I was more going to, let's go through all the planets so that we eventually get to the sun somewhere towards the end. But this is totally, I understand that everything is connected, like this idea of the chord and the rainbow. I really like that association of how everything blends, and in the chart as well, everything blends at the end of the day. It's not just that easy to signal out one thing and one planet and say that is the only one that's acting in this moment. So yes.
Okay, thank you. So what's your hello then, your second Sabian, the Elven Star?
Okay, well, I would allow myself to make the associations just for those 3 that we agree. And I think everybody would agree because they're so obvious, aren't they? So the hello one, to me, has lots of mercurial connotations. So things related to the mind and the intellect and the processing function of all the information data that comes our way. And yeah, again, maybe that's not just Mercury, but yes, you said self-identification in your description. So it's not just having this intuition who we are and where we're going, but also being able to maybe put down into words what this is. I don't have them in front of me. I have them on the document, which I don't want to switch to too much, but I think this was the 6th degree of Aries, which is a square lit on one side. So it, an object in the shape of a square, that's how I understand it, and the light is just on one side. So, well, in my personal circumstances, as I said, I have this tendency to be too much in the mind and having to maybe make a step back every now and then. It's, yes, as you said, lots of planets in Scorpio. One of them is Mercury conjunct Pluto. This is the closest aspect. So that's what I tend to associate the symbol with. Now, Aries 6. Yeah, I guess I have been quite one-sided in my thinking. And being sometimes to an extreme, saying, okay, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to apply my strategy to my life without necessarily wanting to impose it to anybody else. But always having it relatively clear in my mind where I'm going and what I'm going to do, not the details, but the general philosophy. How I get there, what exactly happens, maybe rather I always go back to it and fit it back into the philosophy. So if anything that comes my way, say a possible job or a possible education, or a scenario of how to organize everyday, home lifestyle, all of these things need to be applied to a certain, say, overall philosophy, overall idea. And if it doesn't fit that, I just don't do it. I'm not sure if that makes sense. Is it enough?
You do seem to be single of purpose. When you're doing something, you really, really do it, don't you?
Yes, it's a very focused thing, and it's interesting how everything matches. You know, all different systems like this very one-sided chart that I tend to have. Like my chart is one of those charts that everything is in one place pretty much. So it's planets stuck in one side of the chart, let's say, and it's a sign of concentration. And I think this symbol very well demonstrates, and one more time, that in my particular case, obviously it will be very different for each one of you when you do yours. In my particular case, the thinking maybe needs to be one-sided, so that it does what it needs to do for me. But the square lit on one side, I guess it's this extreme, being too much of something and not enough of something else as well. Today I was going through, this may be relevant, going through also using your advice, James, how to try to rectify the chart by using the Sabian symbols and kind of adjusting different possibilities of the time when we could be born and within several minutes. And I figured out my 11th house cusp is probably another Sabian symbol, which is very relevant here. It's this birth, so how is it called? The butterfly with the right wing more developed than the other one. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with this symbol. And the right wing is this right side of the brain, more developed than the other side. So I thought, okay, well, this has to do with this. They are directly talking about in this symbol about the brain. You know, Roger's explanation is that maybe the right hand side of the function is predominant in a way. So that's why I think maybe it's relevant that way.
Okay, so moving on to the third mystery, which is the two heads looking out and beyond the shadows. This would relate to your Venus energy.
Yes. This one is very straightforward, I believe, in my case. You talked about this sense of relating to love, not just feeling it, but also expressing, exchanging. And the two heads, in my case, my family has been my couple, and this has been for many years. So I do have extended family. I love my parents, and so does my partner, but we have been more or less a family of two partners for many years. And we are this sort of couple that is constantly philosophizing, talking. It's a big concentration on the mind and on the thinking. Very, say, Uranian in a way, or we can also say Mercurial, even though our Mercuries are in the same place, but in totally opposite houses. So thinking similarly, but communicating totally differently. So it's a couple relationship where we've been together for 15, almost 16 years now. And it's been constantly searching for something, searching for truth, searching for ideas, exchanging, otherwise very different. So they look in different directions, these two heads. Yeah, the symbol. We are not doing the same thing. We are interested in different things, and we have a different everyday rhythm of life, even though we live together. But when it comes to discussions, astrology is something we have in common, that thankfully I have somebody to talk to about astrology. It's not just you being in the dark with your foreign language that you speak, astrology, and not many people around to talk to. So that was another way I was able to practice this. So I don't know, what else shall I say about it? If you're interested in any more details, I can share.
Well, that one seems so clear, it's almost ridiculous, isn't it?
Yes,
the
quite.
two heads are actually two heads.
Yes.
Okay, well, the fourth one is the goodbye energy, and for this we have the Aquarius 14 image of the train entering a tunnel. So goodbye is to do with big decisions and changes of life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I understand that this is related to situations when we need to be very adamant and very categorical, those maybe moments when it needs to be a black and white, yes or no decision. So this has been the most difficult for me. Out of all the 7 symbols, I think I need to do most work on this one. I connected to Mars, and well, I believe it's clear, but I happen to have Mars as the most problematic personal planet in my personal birth chart. So again, a very interesting way of the two things coinciding. It is a strength and a weakness at the same time. So I have this very volatile energy of sometimes being too compromising, too much time wasted and time passing without stating, what I want, how I want it, that something needs to be changed for my own interest, when, kind of allowing too many boundaries to be crossed. And then in the next moment, reacting too aggressively to defend the territory. So I have an intrinsic disbalance between Libra and Aries, and I think this particular symbol is such a good reflection of that. That you don't defend, so I don't defend my I don't know, best interest, let's say, or whatever the situation requires. I go to the extreme, and then I become too aggressive or too demanding when the line has been crossed. So this has been an exercise for a lifetime for me, and I haven't solved it yet. How to find balance between these two things and know the moment when the train really needs to go into the tunnel and disregard everything around it. So this train into the tunnel, I associate into very clear idea where you're going, what you want. Obviously, I have a problem with this because my North Node is in Aries, so I need to figure it out first, really clearly in my head, and then go for it, go through the tunnel. I have been fluctuating between a lot of efficiency in everyday work and tasks. So certain days when things are really flying and I do as much work physically as I wouldn't be able to do in other situations for 2 weeks. So this is the way I interpret it, that one.
Okay, I'll talk a little bit about my interpretation in a minute. But moving on to please, the hen scratching around to feed her chicks. That's your please energy, Jupiter, I think.
Mm-hmm. Do you also believe that Jupiter is logical to be associated here?
Oh, sure.
Okay, yeah, that was my idea too, because you said this is the vision, but not just the vision personally, but also what do we need to get involved in? We want to get involved in with other people because they share the same vision. And this was a bit strange for me, this symbol itself, the chicken, the hen with the small chicks. Maybe the best association I can make is with my work related to astrology, because I'm trying to find like-minded people, which is reflected a lot in what we're doing here in these Thursdays. Thursday, I chose it deliberately for these meetings to be on Thursday because it's the Jupiter day. And I thought that's the most conducive day for such interaction. For now, I think it's been working, but yeah, I guess if I imagine I'm the hen, then the chicks are all the pieces of information that, let's say, fit my understanding of how things be done, and then the other people. And also, when we spoke with you, James, I told you something totally different, which maybe you're wondering why I'm not talking about this.
It's just really clear that you're a mother hen, and we're all your little chicks. It couldn't be clearer, could it? There is no better expression of this symbol than what you're doing right now in this moment. Surely, I mean, I'm missing the point here. You're letting us all in and controlling when we can speak and giving us some attention. Like that's what you're doing. It's chosen to do it on a Thursday. I mean, how much more clear do you want to get?
Yes, well, this attraction towards teaching, maybe that's one of the things that we share, because you obviously have so much more experience and knowledge than me. But ever since childhood, I was drawn towards this Jupiterian atmosphere, and I kind of knew I wanted to be this in one way or another. Had no idea what I want to teach, but it was this natural draw. Jupiter is singleton in my chart in Aries. In the 12th house. So I guess it's got to do probably something with this. But it's the similarity among the differences. By the way, maybe it will be interesting for people to know that we are very contrasting in the fact that I've got Sun and Moon in Scorpio, you've got Sun and Moon in Taurus. But I find it very, very helpful. Very, very helpful.
Don't you like quincunxes?
I do very much. I very much appreciate quincunxes.
Well, have you got a quincunx between Jupiter and the Moon?
I do. I think so. I think I do. Yes.
Okay. All right.
That's something I've quite disregarded, but thank you for reminding me of it. Yes.
So on to story then. The group of immigrants as they fulfill the requirements of entry into the new country. So
Yes.
it's reflexive self-consciousness, isn't it? Reflexive self-consciousness. So can you see the obvious connection here?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is too literal even. Maybe we should try to escape from the literacy of the symbol. I've been an immigrant twice, so this sort of going to a different country to, well, settle, it was never planned in both cases. So first to England from Bulgaria, then from England to Spain. But I'm not sure to what extent I've been the typical immigrant. Maybe not. I always kind of retained this sense of separateness from those sort of things and being myself, regardless of where I live, and always at the same time trying to adapt in a way that I try to be respectful to the culture, even for those things there that I didn't quite resonate with, and to learn the language, to ask people about different things, be curious about their own way of life, not be totally closed off. To me, this is a lot to do with adaptation, this symbol. Doing the work, whatever work is necessary, practically, from me, in order to just lead my life in a good way, in everything, the everyday things and work, money making, running the home, and basically fitting in the situation as well. So that's why, to me, the symbol is very Saturnian in a good way. Saturn is the necessary disciplinarian, the necessary, and also it reflects those conditions outside, in this case, the other country, or it could have been my own country, where I need to, live by the rules. I can't ignore the rules.
It could be, but it wasn't. I mean, you're an immigrant, aren't you?
Yes.
You've been an immigrant for a very long time.
I may go back. One day I may go back. This is not excluded.
Right now, as we speak, you're an immigrant. So moving on to yes, the old woman is selling the artifacts of her tribe to passers-by.
And this is your moon, isn't it, James?
This is my moon. I know all about this one.
Well, I remember when we got to this one in our discussion with you, which was also very improvised. You made me pause and think, and even not think, but just listen to you. That was interesting to me because all sorts of things we can associate with this one. It's very close to my ascendant, so that's end of Taurus. I've got end of Taurus ascendant, not the same degree, but very close. And I still don't have an answer, to be honest, what this is about. Well, I have a suggestion, maybe an assumption, that I would only discover that symbol, and that's why I was tempted to say for myself, that's my sun, solar, let's say, or whatever overall conclusive one, because I feel like I need to be older. Like this woman is an old woman that's selling, the artifacts. All I can hope for is that one day, when I have more knowledge, more experience, more years have passed, this thing about teaching will be more natural and more related to, now having something to share, which is not just learned by reading books, but a bit more than that. And that this is really not that much to do with outside things, but more with a developed personality. So she's sharing the artifacts of her own culture, it says. Yeah, so it's assuming of what she's about to start with. Those things that belong to her background. So I think in order for us to have a background, we need to have lived a little bit more. Is it not the case? At least that's how I.
Well, I certainly found it necessary to add a few years. I didn't really understand this wisdom until I became a bit older. Mm-hmm. Okay, can I summarize what I think you have just explained? And we can see if we can find the integration of all seven. Now, this is the biggest challenge of all. I hope you've all followed the fact that we can tie up Radlina's life circumstances and her way of being in life with the Elven Star Sabian symbols. That seems to be really clear, and some of them are absurdly clear. So for example, we've got the sightseeing bus in Scorpio 1, and she went to London, you know, and to see the double-decker bus there. So this is not exceptional. This is almost predictable, where you can actually see the metaphor of the Sabian symbol acted out in a very real way, in some strange coincidental way. It often happens. But anyway, what I'm saying really is that the processes that we've gone through so far are fairly straightforward. Now, they're profound, they're meaningful, and they may be new to us, but they're fairly straightforward. What did you do? How can you interpret that through your Elven Star Sabian symbol? How do you associate that with the 7 words of the 7-word system? That's a fairly simple process, even though it's profoundly challenging, if you can follow my logic. What isn't simple at all is to try and get the overall sense of how the 7 are together as a chord. Now, those of us who listen to music, we may well enjoy the sound of a single note played on a beautiful instrument. You know, a flute sounding one note sounds wonderful, and a guitar sounding one note sounds wonderful. But if you play a chord on a guitar, you have this like, oh, fullness of music. Now, what we're trying to do is to get the atmosphere generated by all of these 7 collectively. And rather than now analyze them into their 7 components, what we're trying to do is to integrate them into their single note. Imagine a light is shining through a prism and turning into the rainbow colors. We've looked at the 7 rainbow colors now in some detail, but what we're trying to do is to infer that white light that must have given rise to those 7, in order for that inference to give us an identification with the soul that gave us the 7 rainbow colors. Does that metaphor work for you? Yeah, okay. So let me summarize what I've understood, and I've learned a lot more about Radlina during this process, obviously. And let's see if we can find, and you will find this, there's a theme, a resonant theme. So we have a woman stuck in Bulgaria that could not offer her the esoteric education that she needed, and she was curious to know more, and she said no to her family, and she went to London, where she saw a double-decker bus. So that's the first one, and just hold on to that energy of saying, no, I know I'm a Bulgarian, but I'm not going to stay here. That was the biggest decision she'd ever made in her life up to that point. No, not enough. And I want you to focus on that. She said, no, not enough for me. Right, where will I go? I'm curious to go to London. That's how she springboarded away from that which was not acceptable towards what might be. And that was the next thing. The what might be is the hello energy. And what we had with Aries 6 is this square lighted on one side. Unless you've got this single focus, this, you know, I'm doing that and nobody's going to distract me, blinkers, you don't punch through. Now imagine we're talking about a Bulgarian woman in London, and it wasn't only a Bulgarian woman, she was from a village in Bulgaria.
A small town, yeah.
Well, a small town. I mean, it wasn't London. You go to London, and I get frightened when I go to London. You know what I mean? I don't go because it's a scary place and people are nasty to you. I don't go there. So I can only imagine what it was like going there. You needed to have blinkers. I'm coming to do this. I'm going to do this. That's what I'm doing. And that's how you said hello to the place. You focused on what you wanted. Now, that does not describe hello normally, does it? Blinkers. Hello is like, oh, I wonder what, you know, that's my hello because I'm a different person. But your hello was blinkered. I'm definitely doing that. Your square was brightly lighted on one side. On one side, you can go because it's lighted. The other side, you're not going to go because it's dark, you know. So your dedication was very clearly stated in that focus. Now, am I right in thinking that the partnership that you've enjoyed had to do with your trip to London?
Yes, a little bit. Not a little bit. It was all to do with it, actually. Yes, he was already living there for a couple of years. His parents had been there.
So you decided to go to London instead of America in order to form this bond of love, which became the two heads.
Finally, yes. But the way it actually happened was that I applied to several different places simultaneously. London, the United States.
But finally, yes is all we need to hear.
Yes.
You know, you actually expanded from being curious about London to being focused on what you wanted. The way in which you actually deepened that into a sense of real appreciation in what you are, what you're about. We're talking about your essential mystical identity here. You could not have done that had you not had these two heads.
Absolutely.
Working together, yeah. So, and you that was a direct result of your being on this track.
Yes.
So then you have the two heads. You're in partnership. You're not doing this alone anymore. You were in Bulgaria and you're saying no to your family. I'm doing this alone. I'm doing this alone. Here's somebody to share it with. And that opened your heart. That expanded not only your understanding, now not only your understanding is mental, but it's also deepened. It's in the heart. So we move to the fourth mystery, which is the train entering the tunnel, which you have said that you don't really, you haven't mastered this one as fully as you think you have. But I wonder what that must have felt like going back to Bulgaria. You actually did say no to Bulgaria, but you also said goodbye. Mm-hmm. You know, you said goodbye like a train entering a tunnel. It's a real punch, wouldn't it? And that's the energy of the train entering a tunnel. And there is this Mars in Libra energy you're describing, which certainly can be described as ambivalent. That's what Libra is, isn't it? Maybe this, maybe that, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I've studied Mars in Libra in some depth. And what happens is they say maybe, yeah, I'll do it, maybe, for a long time, until eventually the time is right. And there's some mystical choice of time. And then they just act like a Mars in Aries would. And everything gets done immediately and elegantly and gracefully, as if it had been Mars in Aries, they'd have been bullying and pushing and fighting their way to the same result. But Mars in Libra just waits until the time is right and then acts very gracefully, gets it done, and then goes back to being ambivalent and lazy again.
So well said. So the two heads were planning, waiting, and when the moment came, the two heads went through the tunnel, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, in going to Spain is how this actually played out. Okay.
The fifth energy is this what you're doing now? You've actually taken up a role as a facilitator, taking care of people and taking care of people's emotional process. You're a mother hen. So that's a big part of your visionary identity in life, which is a direct result of having done all the studies that you've done. It's not, you're taking it for granted that your vision in life has to do with what you started by going to London and expanding your esoteric knowledge. But you shouldn't take it for granted. Somehow you had this track from the very beginning, which has brought you where you are now, to this leader in astrology, and you're moving in that direction. And one of the things I don't think is quite as clearly understood as it might be, I am also an immigrant. I'm not living in my own country anymore. And I've been on the road a lot in different countries. And what I've noticed is that in order not to be a problem, not to be a stranger, not to be an enemy, you have to be hugely aware of what you're doing, who you are, and not necessarily impose that to establish the sense of self. The opposite is true. Just be sensitive and listen, see, feel what the other person, the other country wants of you, so that you're not actually in harm's way, let alone being polite and courteous and spiritually evolving. It's dangerous unless you develop this reflexive self-consciousness. This is how I am. I remember once I was in an Islamic country, and I went into the mosque in order to get a sense of how they prayed and everything. And after about 10 minutes sitting there having a really kind of interesting time looking around, I wondered why people were looking at me. And then I thought it's because I'm not the same color as they am and stuff. And then I realized they were all wearing hats and I didn't have a hat on. And my hand just flung itself to the top of my head. Oh my God! You know, in that moment, I just saw myself as very intrusive, very invasive, very rude. It wasn't until I had that reflexive self-consciousness, everybody was looking at me, and I thought, well, you know, this is because I've got white skin and they haven't. And it wasn't, it was because I didn't have a hat on. So the learning of the subtleties of who you are and how you are that way comes from being an immigrant, which I would say you have mastered that pretty well. And then we learn to we come to the seventh mystery, and I think it takes a lot of wisdom to say what you did say. Some of these Sabian mysteries are not obvious, and you've got to learn them, and you learn things as you get older. This is one of those, is an old woman. You know, my sun and my moon images are both old. I'm the old man teaching the mysteries, and I'm the old woman trying to sell beads. I didn't get Sabian symbols until very recently, you know, so you have to take that into account. Now, what will you be like when you're an old woman? Well, my sense is that you're going to be saying yes more often and no a little bit less fiercely, perhaps, you know, because the world has actually opened up and accepted you at last, because you had a long way to come from being a small town girl in Bulgaria to being an international figure on the astrology scene. It's a big journey, and you know, you want to go a little bit further with that, and the time will come when you're saying, yeah, I can accept this engagement. No, I don't. You know, you're going to be saying yes to things and no to things, and very comfortable with that. And at that point, you'll be a lot more relaxed about it. We began this conversation, Adlina and me, today, and she said, "Are you excited, James?" Oh, that would be the day. I mean, I remember being excited quite a long time ago, but I've done a lot of this for a long, long time. No, I'm not excited. I'm just relaxed with it. I mean, this is what I like to do. I love it. I love all this thing, and it's just fun, you know. So I'm at that level with it, and that's the level that will come, I think. You know, that's the seventh mystery for you.
But at the moment you are excited, but relaxed.
Yeah, let me just... What I want to do now is to try and hold all of those seven at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a theme. Can any of us perceive the theme in this? There's a definite theme that we're looking for. And it's obvious to me that there is a theme in her life which is mirrored within the Sabian images of the Elven Star. Is it obvious to everybody else or not yet?
Travel, transportation.
Say again?
I was going to say travel, transportation, movement.
Who's speaking?
Robin?
Oh,
yes,
hey there.
And I had the idea of gathering in order to distribute to humanity or to those in need, that's been a theme of her life.
Yeah, both of those things. Very good. Okay.
Merging, like the merging of the separation to the one.
Lovely. That works for me.
I would like, I don't know why, but I'm thinking of the phases of the moon, and she's been following all the phases through these cycles, and her moon is culminating. So in her moon will be actually a full culminating moon as she gets older.
I like that very much. I think that's a general thing within the system, but I think it does apply very clearly here. So thank you, Michaela.
You're welcome.
I think there's another sense of pushing. There's an inherent push. She's really been self-motivated to push her way out of Bulgaria, push her way into a world, single-focused, push, expand. There's this moving into something new, almost like creating space in order to embrace you and embody you.
I see Jupiter quincunxing her moon.
Yes, exactly so. I absolutely agree with that. Well done.
But it didn't go completely smoothly because Radlina is very intelligent, so she needs to question and debate things a lot. And but she's still culminating.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this Moon Jupiter connection is well worth studying. And when you said you had a Jupiter singleton, did you mean it was unaspected? Is that what you meant?
No, when I say singleton, it's the only planet located on one side of the chart, while everything else is, I have a big stellium in the 6th, Jupiter is in the 12th, and lots of the other planets are around the 6th house stellium. So it's like a contrast back and forward, this bucket chart with the handle. So the handle is Jupiter in my case. But yeah.
Some people use that term wrongly, but no, that's the correct, yeah. So this Jupiter is a key figure in your chart, you know, because it's
and it almost, that Jupiter, that Sabian symbol of the hen with all her chicks, like the hen is Jupiter and all the chicks are all the other planets.
Yes, very good, Lauren. Very good. Yeah, I agree. And so if you try and piece all of this together and to get a sense of yourself as a soul, as a white light coming through the personality into these 7 expressions of it, if you could get that sense, that atmosphere of self, then you would have completed the method. Now, I'm not expecting to be able to do that on Zoom with all of these people looking, you know, but that is why we would perhaps need to go on retreat to finalize this process. Because let me just speak briefly now about the retreat process. You see, what we've been doing so far is quite intellectual, and it needs a study of astrology and, to be honest, very truthful about our life circumstances, very open and sharing the information, which you have done, Radlina, very lovely, thank you. And all of that, which is a bit unusual, we're good at it because we're astrologers, but we notice with our clients, they don't share all of their personal information unless they're encouraged or threatened, you know. Oh, I got my own methods. And the point is that we have to do that. We have to open up and be honest about our life experiences, try and understand them using 2 different systems in this case, one more left brain, one more right brain, the 7-word system and the Sabian symbols, and then come up again to this ability to integrate it. Now, when you are in retreat consciousness, you're moving through meditation and spiritual practice up to a level of touching the soul's awareness, then, perhaps only then, you can see how they all come together as the essence self. So in your case, you would, Radlina, you'd focus a little bit less on the pushing and the curiosity and the intellectual understanding. You know, you will have become a master at your craft because, you know, that's where you are with it. And then there's this other sense of, actually, it doesn't matter. All of what you have done gets you to the point where you realize that was all just so that I could let go of it and actually use intuition and nothing else to understand the mysteries and understand what you're doing, who you are, who you're with, all your clients. You just understand all of this intuitively. You have that profundity of insight intuitively. Now, something just happened. Did you feel that?
Yes.
Yeah, Goldie got it. Did anybody else feel it? There's a shift in the atmosphere, which I noticed in my art. Radlina's smiling. Goldie's got it. Lauren, did you feel it? Okay, I'm not sure that I can convince people, but there's a facility that you can get to where you can feel the energetic shift in a person. And if I can go back to Richard now, when I was first doing this process, Richard was the first person I did it with. And I saw that shift in you, and I said exactly to Richard what I'm saying now, didn't I, Richard? And when I brought your attention to it, I think, if I'm being honest here, you said, oh yeah. You know, I noticed it and you agreed that I was right, but you wouldn't have seen it because it was just like too airy-fairy and wispy-waspy and subtle. Am I right in saying all of that?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Is Mara still here? Oh, Mara's gone, I think. Oh, that's a shame. So I had exactly that same experience.
Her box is still here. Mara talk.
Oh, is she?
Yeah, she's just not on camera.
Do you want to give her a voice?
Yes, she needs to unmute herself if she's been muted. Let me see if I can give her a reminder. Oh, sorry, what was the name again? Who am I looking for?
Mara E. Tolk.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'm asking her to unmute, but are
She
you
might
here?
not. She might.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Mara?
yes.
I'm
Can you hear me?
here. Yeah, I can hear you.
And I was just
Can you hear
talking
me?
about, yeah, I can. I was just talking about the process that I went through with Richard, and
Yeah.
I've gone through that process with you, and I'm suggesting that there's a point when you get the integration where there's a feeling, which I centered in the heart, and I'm just wondering if you agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I felt the same with you.
And you've actually taken other people, clients, through this process yourself, have you not?
I've taken a friend through the same process. Yes, it's true.
Did you get that result with them?
Something similar. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she got a deeper sense of herself, and it brought her onto a journey of her own that brought her to a deeper understanding of her own sense of self.
That's lovely. Thank you, Mara. And I want to go back to Richard now, because Richard and I were talking earlier, and what Mara has just said is exactly what you said an hour ago to me, a couple of hours ago, wasn't it? That having got that first sense of, oh, this is a new feeling, this is something, you had then to stay with it, to think about it, to work with it, to notice how it impacted upon your life. You freezing on me? I think Richard's
Maybe
frozen.
Richard, are you here?
Oh well. Oh.
Yes.
Anyway, so you've just got that feeling, Radlina.
Absolutely, not just now, but also the first time when we did the exercise. And I also thank you for pointing out, you and Michaela, for pointing out the quincunx, because another association is not just because the Jupiter is so important and the moon is angular, but also this, I don't know if you think of the quincunx as a sixth house similarity, as a symbol, and there is something here that it's not very clear what is going on with the quincunx. So,
Radlina, can I stop you?
Yes.
We'll come back to that. I want to hold this atmosphere.
Okay.
What we're talking about is this atmosphere of some subtle level, which is really unusual, so subtle that even if you're feeling it, you don't notice that you're feeling it. But when you're with somebody else who's looking for it, and they say, there it is, then you see it. That is the mystery of the Elven Star method. Now, when you're in a retreat situation and everybody is used to that feeling because they've had it themselves and they're listening with such a profound sense of acceptance, then that feeling becomes shared. It becomes a group shared event. And at that point, we've moved into the group consciousness. And I'm expecting there to be 7 people doing it simultaneously. So we move into what I would then call the group soul, where everyone in the group is aware of themselves as a soul and a part of something greater than what they've known before, an aspect of a group soul, and that group soul identifying with elvish reality, the number 7, the energy of mysticism and magic. And in that state of consciousness, then we have the ability to make profound effect on the subtle realms. And if that effect is prayerful, if we say, let there be peace in the world, let there be love in the world, or whatever we do to affirm that follows the process. So the final stage of the Elven Star method is affirmation. Now, affirmation is when you say something which isn't true, but you're in a heightened state of consciousness where it is true. So you might say, I am young and slim and look good looking, and you know, you might not think it. And that's what some people call affirmation. It won't work. But if you get into this heightened state of consciousness the Elven Star is going to create, and you make an affirmation, then you're in the realm of magic where it does work. In fact, it's dangerously powerful. And you have to be very, very careful when you're in that state of being, what to think, how to use your mind. You have to be very centered in your heart when you do this. So the retreat would guarantee that we'd be in that state of being. Okay, great. Well, I'm very pleased that we touched that state. I didn't expect this. And thank you, Richard, and I thank you, Mara. And I thank you, Goldie. You were there with me. That's great. So, and Radlina, yeah, you got there. Thank you for sharing all of this. And that's it. I'm feeling quite excited now, actually, to be honest. Right, I've finished. Anybody got any questions? Raven.
Yeah, hi. My question is, being outside of this, I've been to your website a couple of times. I'm really enamored with the artwork and seeing some of these things. But my question is, in this process from the outside of it, it looks almost like these two things are separated. In other words, the first thing that you were talking about was going back to your life and finding these significant points in your life. And then the second part was what those degrees were that, that you hit on that give you the 7 points. But what I want to know is, how do you put those together? In other words, it seemed almost like a Rorschach thing where you're being intuitive about the meaning of those 7 points. And how do you fit those together with those experiences that you picked that were significant beforehand?
Okay.
Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, sure. And it's not random. It's not clear, though. You know, there is the need for an intuitive interpretation. But for example, if you were to examine my life and you looked at the very kind of the early bit of my adult life, you would see that I spent most of my time becoming an accountant. You know, now if later in my life I ignored that part of my being, I couldn't say who I am, because today I'm not just an astrologer, I'm an accountant who became an astrologer. And I actually went through a circuitous route. So if you're looking at the identity that I have, you have to take all of those facts into account to find out the subtle identity that I have now. And the identity is that the keywords of the 7-word system tell you what to look for. If we were discussing my moods, it would be something else. If you were discussing my education, it'd be something else. I'm not sure if I've addressed the point.
No, but it's probably because it's a confusing question. I mean, it's not really what I was trying to ask, but Radlina, did you understand what I was trying to ask?
Well, maybe I can just guess whether I understood it. You would say, Raven. I feel like you cannot quite make the connection between the 7-word idea and the Sabian symbols that correspond to each word. Is that what you're struggling with in reality?
Close. You're close. It's that I'm not making the connection between having picked out significant events in my life and then matching those with the symbols that we get through the degrees of the astrology.
Well, the events have meaning, don't they?
They what?
The events have meaning. I mean, what we do is look at all
Yes,
of
the
their
events
events.
have meaning. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, they either mean establishing identity or developing curiosity or developing the heart, you know, and that meaning is something that only you can decide.
But the Sabian symbol sort of already laid it out, what it's, you're trying to fit those together, right?
I think you can't, I think that the symbiosis of those two things can't happen until you go through the process of laying them out, and then you use the state of being of intuition in order to bridge them. It's not an intellectual lineup ahead of time. It's a faith in the process that will take you there.
I understand.
You use your intuition.
So Raven, I don't know if anybody can see me. Oh, there I am. So what I'm basically getting is that you're asking if we are creating arbitrary meaning out of this by, you know, having something symbolic here and then retrofitting our life experiences.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, sort of like Barnum statementing ourselves into believing whatever's coming up, but which I think is an incredibly valid question to bring up. I think it's absolutely necessary, but I think that part of the intuitive genius that is pouring through this methodology is that it does grant us a pathway to meaning in our lives, you know, creates coherence and gives us checkpoints to base our identities off of. And I think this is really important right now because yes, this could turn into a culty phenomenon for sure. I don't want to ignore that personally, but in lieu of our systems of meaning dissolving in the changes of these times, we do need some sort of compass. And if we can find that in our own interiority through these self-reflective systems, then that becomes a part of the genius that is available to us, and that is what makes it essential.
I get it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up.
That was really well said, Victoria. Fantastic.
Thank you, Jutta.
Very well said, because I was reminded of constantly, I'm thinking more in mythological terms, and I was constantly listening in the back of my head to Joseph Campbell, how he explains the hero's journey. But you have articulated it so 100% wonderful. Wonderful. Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Another question.
I have a question for you, James.
Dwayne. Thank you.
I've had my own encounters with number 7 over the years, and I'm interested to hear from you. You know, what was it like at the inception moment when you got this system? Like, did it come as a revelation? Did it come something you teased out slowly, or how did it actually come into form? The very initial prototype.
I don't do it like that. You're a heavily Aquarius kind of guy, aren't you?
Yeah.
I'm not. I'm Taurus. I got Capricorn rising. I got the Moon trine Saturn. I don't have sudden breakthroughs of anything. Okay. Everything I do is step by step by step. Imagine 300,000 years ago sitting by a campfire, and you're discussing the number of lights that move in the sky. And everyone is absolutely convinced that there are only 6. There's the sun and the moon, and there's Venus, and there's Mars, and there's Jupiter, and there's Saturn. What else could there be? And there's one guy that says, well, no, there's Mercury as well. No, there isn't. Well, why does nobody else see Mercury? It's because in order to see Mercury, you have to look at the sky every night for years and then believe in something that's so subtle. Nobody else can see it. And everyone else knows that you're wrong, not only in your village, but in every other village that you ever visit. You're the one shaman that's actually aware that there are 7 moving lights in the sky. Just imagine that 300,000 years ago. Well, that's where we stand, the esotericists of this time, that we're saying, yeah, look, we get it. And everyone else, businessmen and politicians and neighbors, they're saying, no, you're wrong. No, there's Mercury. Look, we're doing exactly the same now that they were doing then. Now, you would go to the next village because you would just know Mercury was there intuitively before you saw it, because you're an Aquarius. And you'd have to take me with you, because I would say, look, here are the facts. On this day, we saw it. On that day, we had this evidence. On this day, here's the proof. And you and I would go to the village together and we would convince people that Mercury existed, because nobody would trust either of us alone. You have the metaphor that I'm telling here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm that one guy that's the accountant. I'm saying, no, look, here are the facts. This is what I did. And I've got evidence from Richard. I've got evidence from Mara. I've got evidence from Radlina. I've shown you all what I can do. You've seen it with your own eyes. There. That's the facts of the matter. That's my process, because I'm so earthy. Whereas guys like you, you're offered an idea, you think for about 20 minutes in silence, and then you go, yep, you're right.
Yeah, you got it.
So,
thank you.
So 7 is just, to say when did I understand the number 7 was my life journey, and that it would lead to here. I think before I was 4 years old, I knew I was never going to fit by the age of 4. I left home when I was 4, carrying a suitcase and everything. I got on a bus.
James, I would like to ask a question with the number 7.
Yeah.
Okay. I think someone mentioned earlier that Chiron transits the entire Earth in 51 years.
Radlina, yeah.
Okay. 51 degrees is the septile. I'm not saying it's exact, but the first thing I thought of, 51 degrees, well, that's a septile. And I have the information in my own book here about the septile. And it is in the 7th harmonics.
Yes.
A septile. And I just thought that there was a correlation between the two when you're speaking, and the words that jump out are metaphysical, cosmic intervention, a mysterious whole behind all the parts of the subject. Like, imagine when you're in this 7th level, you understand 1 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I thought it just jumped out at me. And
okay, that's why I began with the study of the number 7, to sort of say, well, that's the territory we're in. Everything that you have in this system is based on the number 7. The 7-word system, the 7 planes of consciousness, the Elven Stars, septiles. I think it's quite cute to think about Chiron, but it's 51 isn't quite 51 and 26 minutes. So I'm not yet convinced. I like the idea, and I'm not going to let it go. And it feels like it. Chiron feels like this, and I'm more persuaded by the feeling than any mathematics.
Yes, it's just with a lot of times with Chiron, I hear the word wounded. So I'm trying to think of this as metaphysical energy coming in and bringing the sense of healing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I hope so. Certainly, yeah. I think if more people were more in tune with soul consciousness, then healing energy would expand. And I think that every time we do an Elven Star retreat and we move into this high level of healing energy, and we start to kind of network that around the world, then healing will certainly follow. I don't doubt that. So yeah, Chiron makes perfect sense to me. You know, I feel it's right, but I don't have the mathematical proof, you know.
Anyway, I appreciate you listening, James. I've enjoyed everything you said tremendously and have learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to ask a question if I could. Here, let me undo my, let's get there. What my question is the relationship that really is intriguing me between an elf or elven and the seven, and how that is made. Of course, I get the magic that elf is towards the magic, but could you talk to us about how you made that association of elf?
Well, it's not my association. The seventh harmonic that creates a star when you draw it is called the Elven Star. It's called the pentagram or the heptagram or other things as well, but it's called the Elven Star, and so I took that on. You know, if you look into Wiccan pagan traditions, they're already learning about the interpretation of that, but they're not doing it properly. They're doing it wrongly, their interpretation, because what they've done is taken the meaning of the 5-pointed star and added 2 extra points. It's just missing the point. You can't do that. So nobody's really done convincing work on the interpretation of the Elven Star. But I think one thing I love to do is to remember the depiction of the elves in Lord of the Rings. I think we have to accept that Lord of the Rings is as good a depiction as we're ever going to get on the energy that we're talking about here. And elves are of the world, they're in the world, but they can fly, and they eat, but they only eat a vegan kind of diet, and they don't die unless they choose to die. I mean, they've got all sorts of qualities that I think are available to those of us that are actually moving into this vibration. I see the elves as the only real example in Lord of the Rings that tunes in fully to the number 7. I mean, the whole thing is the number 7, but the elves are the epitome of that energy, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm also just want to say I'm I had run from the calculation before this session, and now I'm very excited to get to work with your and get to the fun of the exploration of this.
It is fun. Raven wants to ask something.
Yes, Raven.
Yeah, this is a quick question. It's the only degree that I took off your website. It's not mine, but it's a friend's. And when I told him the meaning, he was upset. And so I wonder if you could just tell me how you interpret the 6 degrees of the sun in Pisces.
So the degree of the sun of that person is the 6th degree of Pisces. Is that?
Yeah, it's got to do with the military band or something. I don't remember now, but I'm sure you'll know, James.
Well, it's not really focusing on the military as much as it is focusing on the principle of dressing the part.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. So if we're studying magical processes like the Sabian symbols are, then we have to understand what glamour really is. Each of us presents ourselves to a world with an image. Some like short hair, some long hair, some look pretty, some don't, some, we all present ourselves to the world. And the military inevitably have a very strong presentation of image. One of the most significant parts of Hitler's rise to fame was his ability to create an image that spoke exactly to the energy that he wanted to develop. And we dress the part in order for us to fake it till you make it. I would say that's the meaning of Pisces 6 in my understanding.
Yes, that sounds, actually, he may have understood it with his reaction. Okay, thank you.
I think anybody that reacts is actually getting something from the work. If you don't react, then you're not getting anything. And a reaction tends to be negative. I had one guy, interesting, I thought you might be mentioning the next degree, Pisces 7. I had one guy angry with me a month ago because he said, why didn't you mention crucifixion and martyrdom and everything? Why can't you say that Pisces 7 people are martyrs and victims? And I said, well, I'm never going to teach that. Have you not understand? I'm like, that's so negative. The Christian idea of the cross and crucifixion and self-blame and martyrdom is just wrong. Yeah. I'm not going to promote that. And here we have another example of where the military is just wrong. The only reason we've got the military is because we're lacking self-discipline. Jutta.
Yeah, my thoughts on that, and it is very, very interesting. I'm totally intrigued. But are you talking right now about the sun symbols, which incorporate the word no?
Sometimes. What's
the examples of the military and the example of the 7 degrees Pisces, would that have been the relationship to the word no?
No.
With the people? No?
No, the Sabian symbols can be any of the planets and any of the 7 words. It depends what you've got in your chart.
Oh, so, I know that, but the 7 degree Pisces, would that have been the sun in 7 degree Pisces? Do I make myself clear? So, or for example, Raven's military, that was 6 degree Pisces. But was that the sun, in relation to the sun and the word no for that person? Do I make myself understood now?
Yeah, I understand you, Raven.
Yeah.
What Jutta is asking you is, your friend was Pisces 6. Was that his sun sign? Is he a Pisces guy?
Sun, yeah. Sun.
Right. So my next question now is, James, would that then relate to the word no? Because it's...
Yeah, I understand the question. It's a very good question. And I think in my case, most assuredly it did. The first thing I did with my statement...
I got it. I feel I have it. Because that no, this is why Raven's friend reacted, oh God, I don't like it. Because that no, he says no, to examine part of his shadow self, of his unconscious.
Yes, very good.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That is where the no comes in. No, I'm not going to go down into my shadow. I'm not going to go down and look at...
Yeah, that's very good.
That sounds so right. That sounds so right.
Yes, good.
I get a really strong feeling about that answer.
Intriguing.
Okay, thank you. And it's not only that they're saying no to their shadow, it's also they're saying no to their light.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've come across this often.
Yeah, it's intriguing, isn't it? I find it absolutely fabulous. Yeah.
It's the only time I mentioned that to that whole system, and I went, boy, I'm not mentioning that again.
Any questions? More questions? Goldie. Carrie's later. Goldie first.
So this isn't a question. This is just something I've experienced in my own, not necessarily in the Elven system, but in polarity itself. That polarity, we often think of polarity as opposites and disconnected, when in truth, of course, they're 2 sides of the same coin. And what I find with the polarity of truth and deception is that, or even true nature and ego, when we ask for one, the other side will always show up. And the thing about the truth won't jump up and down and scream, look at me, look at me. deception will jump up and down and scream, look at me. So we kind of learn the truth by looking at what is not the truth. It's the discerning of it. And that's the intuitive aspect where we can trust what we discern, because it seems to be the only way it happens. And then it confirms. So
I think so. I think there is a question about whether we perceive truth that exists or whether we create truth. I think that's another question, which Aristotle and Plato were discussing quite a long time ago. Before I get on to Kerry, can I ask Ben to clarify the question you've asked in the messages? Does that relate to life tracks, which you haven't mentioned specifically? Can you give Ben some sound?
I can only invite him to turn.
Yeah, sorry. That was in relation to Raven's question ages ago, so it's not really relevant.
All right. Kerry. Give Kerry some sound.
I have a question about the proposed retreat. Does that happen online?
No, you have to come to Ireland.
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah,
The borders are closed.
When is it?
We can't leave Australia.
Well, I've postponed the retreat that was going to happen May the 7th on my birthday. It has to happen now in August, and I only want 7 people, and I've got 10 applicants so far. So I'm thinking about doing one in September. And one of the questions I wanted to ask is, if I did another one in September, so that we should be finished with the COVID restrictions, how many people here might come to Ireland for that?
Well, I'll definitely come down to Kerry.
Well, not you, Goldie. You're coming in August, darling.
well, it just gives me more time with my dad. You know, my
Oh,
father.
you've got to come in September. Okay, but extra people.
It's a good chance. Better chance. You know, you get
extra people. So Radlina's one. Is it Utah or Jutta?
Utah.
Utah's another one. Is there a third?
I'd be a maybe.
Raven, how far have you got to come?
From Atlanta, Georgia, which has become the political capital of the world right now.
I don't see the news.
Maybe, who knows?
That's Rita. Cecilia?
Maybe.
All right. I'll write emails to people to see if that maybe turns into a yes. But one of the things that I might do is to just make that available. And even if there's only 3 or 4 people coming, it can still be, I mean, as a one-to-one basis, this still works. So if there's enough people to have 2 events, then perhaps I will. Okay.
Will you be doing more online classes like this, though?
I haven't thought about it. What else is there for me to say?
Well, I just think there's a learning, just everybody speaking, you know, because I've definitely learned about my own, you know, cohesion.
Well, if it becomes appropriate to invite me back to Radlina's group, maybe we can do it.
Always. I have an idea, an undeveloped idea, just something to think about and for everyone to consider. I thought that this is such an interesting process to do with other people too, not just like what we did with me as an example. And if we are kind of repeating this, let's say once a month or once every 2 months, whatever you believe is appropriate, this could be a great way also to study the Sabian symbols, because there are the 360 symbols out there that I have worked with a lot of them and some of them I haven't even read, I think, because they never came to my attention during studying a chart. But any opportunity to go deeper into them and now also putting them into context with the system will be, for me, something that can be a recurring thing, a recurring meeting. So every time another person could be the case. I don't know if you like this idea, or maybe it needs to be tweaked a little.
I like it as an idea. I mean, in practice, it's a bit of a challenge. It's a bit demanding. I mean, for me to work with a lot of people watching what I'm doing is a lot more difficult than to do it one-to-one. And actually, it's difficult, much more difficult online than it would be face-to-face. So, let me just think about that. I like the idea about meeting again and including the Elven Star and Sabian Symbols as the focus of our attention. So let's see. Let me think about it and talk to you separately about it.
I also haven't thought about it. So this is just thinking of possible ways to apply different things related to the Sabian Symbols, especially.
Well, there's a whole other region with the Elven Star, because we've talked about applying the Elven Star to the sun sign.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that Ruby Fumiski is currently doing is developing the calculator to provide the septiles of the moon sign so that we can create the Elven Star based on the moon.
Yes.
And Mercury and Venus and Mars and so on. Now, that would give us a whole different take on our personal history. Instead of asking who you met, where you went, I'm going to ask questions like, how did you feel at that time? And how did you think at that time? And what were the things that developed the way you relate to people? It's like really subtle, and that's always possible. I think it's maybe years down the line, but maybe not. Maybe it's more immediate.
Mm-hmm. Well, can I say something? Well, it seems like maybe it's a good idea to also experiment with the new moon before birth. I don't know if you would agree with this, but everything that we discussed about my symbols in this bottom line, maybe theme that could be revealed, I have found it very, very connected to the symbol of Libra 29, which happens to be my new moon before birth, as another symbol of beginning. Like the sun could be a beginning, the moon can be a beginning. And this symbol is a humanity seeking to bridge the span of knowledge. So this is the process of, as I think Michaela said, spending kind of a lifetime gathering information, knowledge, selecting and so on, and then giving it. I believe all the symbol of my septiles were pointing somehow into this direction.
Lovely.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions or comments before we say goodbye? Maybe yes.
Okay. And I remember when you were saying, like, when we do the Sabian symbols, okay, like if it's 17, 36 minutes, that you move it into 18.
That's
yes.
Degree, yeah.
What do you do when you have a planet that is, say, 29 10 minutes degree? You cannot move it forward.
Yes, the 30th degree.
30th degree.
Oh, it becomes a 30th degree.
There is such a thing as a 30th degree.
I'm not trying to be funny, but it may sound funny, okay? Is that what I have Jupiter in Cancer at 29 10 minutes retrograde. So would I still interpret that as 30?
Yeah, look, here's the explanation. If somebody has a planet in the first minute of Aries, for example, that's the first degree of Aries, isn't it, that their planet is in? But it would be called 0 degrees 01, but it would be the first degree of Aries. I mean, there's this way of counting 1, 2, 3, and another way of counting first, second, third. They're called by some other name. So we're just talking about that second way of counting. It's the first degree, or the 30th degree.
I see.
So yeah. My sun is 15 degrees, 38 minutes of Taurus. Therefore, it's Taurus 16, the 16th degree of Taurus. It's just a way of counting.
It's very interesting because I've been following the Sabian symbols in my chart for years, but I've always read the degree that it says on my birth chart. I never have ever read the next degree.
Yeah, you're saying it wrong. you're not reading the degree on, the degree that's written on your horoscope is the 16th degree if it's 15 degrees 38 minutes. That's all that's going. You're just calling it by the wrong name. And interestingly, there is a connection between your own degree and the previous one. So that's why people sometimes get it wrong, but it feels like they're getting it right, because it makes sense. You have to learn the previous degree in order to realize the degree itself. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Last questions. All done? I'm going to say goodbye soon. Last questions? Nothing. All right.
Wow.
So, thank you, Radlina.
Thank you, everyone. And maybe one final word from me, if you allow, just very, very quickly. As a way to say thank you to you, James. I think there is something we got close to, but didn't quite say. And this is the importance of the personality. And what I felt when I worked with this technique with you, because the technique is new to me, I realized something very important, and you actually told me that. I told you, but we're having this conversation and my partner is saying, but you're simply sharing other people's ideas. Think about it. And you told me, no, he's wrong. You are what you're actually sharing every time, whatever you're using, astrology, Elven Star, Sabian Symbols, whatever you're using, you're sharing yourself. And this is what affects people. And I think this magical moment that happened at one point was more down to the personality than to the technique. I'm sorry if maybe you would contradict me here, but that's how I felt, that the personality is the biggest factor. And then it can draw from every technique the same thing. So this is quite...
I want to say both yes and no, don't I? I want to be that special person that can do this, but I also want my system to work for everyone. So
as long as you do it, maybe as long as you do it, it will work for everyone.
I think people can move into the state where they find their own way to use it. I know Richard has had a good result with it, but slower in his way. I know Mara has had a good result with it. I think you've got to make any system your own.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I do it my way, but other people will find their own way with it, maybe.
Well, I think my case demonstrates that it's definitely valid to somebody that knows nothing about it. It is very perfectly valid. So very interesting.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed myself very much this afternoon. I appreciate your attention. Thank you all for coming. And it may be that we meet again in a little while.
I would be very happy if we do something like this again at some point.
Thank you, James.
Bye, everyone. Have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Radalina.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.